And then if you want to, you can also use a text editor and the free command line, the free SDK, which is command line tools. So you're not tied into any specific way of building applications. There are actually open source complete IDE solutions that you can use and tie in with the same free Flex framework and also the free AIR SDK to create all these, whatever option that you want. You can do it command line. There's also all of it's scriptable via Ant. So you can have a level of automation. You can integrate automated unit testing. There's a lot of things that you can do as far as AIR-based applications, especially towards enterprise-class mobile applications. So a couple AIR applications in the wild, just to kind of show you that this isn't a technology that's just sitting on the desks of people at Adobe, but it's actually being used worldwide. What I have here is an image from the game Machinarium. This was released, I don't know, around a month ago, maybe a little bit longer, as a game for the iPad. Within the first day of Machinarium being in the iOS market, it became the #1 paid game for the iPad. Within the first week, it became the #1 overall game for the iPad, or not necessarily game, the #1 overall application in Apple's App Store. So it was the #1 selling app. It was built using AdobeAIR, and it's an extremely, extremely addicting puzzle game. I finally got through it, completed the whole thing, and I've been able to curb my addiction. And what's interesting about this is it was also originally developed as a Flash game for the browser. It was developed using ActionScript, and using the AIR runtime and some performance optimizations. The developers were able to take that Flash code base and turn that into a successful mobile application. This game has also been released for the BlackBerry Playbook, and there is a build of it coming out for Android soon, but I'm not sure if it's actually available yet or if it's still undergoing optimization for Android platforms. Also, some applications, I'll just go ahead and demo these. Has anybody heard about the Adobe Touch suite of applications? One person, two people. So Adobe is releasing a new line of applications specifically for touch-based devices, so tablets. They're going to target iOS and Android. They're not publicly available yet, but I'd like to show you the Adobe Touch suite of applications running, and in this case, I have a pre-release build running on the Samsung Galaxy Tab 10.1. So what I've got here, this is actually Photoshop Touch. It is a image manipulation program that's specifically geared towards tablet devices. So what's interesting about this is an image that I was just able to pull off of Facebook. That's my wife and my daughter. And what I can do is go through and start manipulating these images. And this was all developed using AdobeAIR for the interface. And then there are some native extensions in here for a lot of the image processing algorithms. So I can go through and here's something that I've already played with to add some stylization to the image. So there's actually multiple layers here. So I have a sketch layer. I have a layer that gives different levels of color, different kinds of effects. So let me go ahead and turn these back on. So if I select this one, I can go in and I can change the blend mode, or I can change how it's displayed on the screen. And it's kind of hard to see that one, but there's a lot that you can do. This is a real application that is coming out to Android and iOS, and I'm not sure what other platforms they're going to be bringing it to, but I know it's coming out on both Android and iOS. It was developed using AdobeAIR. Okay. Wow, I need to hurry up then. So before going too far into the other ones, another application called PolitiFact. This one was very successful in news applications in iOS App Store. 5 different markets. I'll go ahead and jump through. The other technology I want to talk about is PhoneGap. So PhoneGap, this was through the acquisition of Nitobi, is an open source HTML and JavaScript-based framework for developing cross-platform mobile applications. Essentially, PhoneGap applications are a 100% width and 100% height web view that allow you to create your interfaces in both HTML and JavaScript And then there's a JavaScript API for native to JavaScript communication so that you can interact with whatever functionality that's supported by the framework through JavaScript. But there's also a very robust mechanism for creating native plugins that allow you to write native code and write JavaScript APIs for those. And so from your JavaScript code, you can call custom native code if you so need to do that. But this is essentially a web view inside of your application. It's reusing the web view for whatever platform you're developing towards. So whether it's iOS, whether it's Android, it's going to reuse the native web controls for that. You can use all JS frameworks, or JavaScript frameworks. So you can use jQuery, jQuery Mobile, Sencha, MooTools, XUI, even the IAD.js framework for developing IADs. And there's also a service that PhoneGap provides called build.phonegap.com, which allows you to upload your code to essentially to a cloud-based service. And from that, that'll give you links where you can download precompiled builds for the different platforms that are supported. PhoneGap supports iOS, Android, BlackBerry, starting at, I think, BlackBerry 4, Palm, HP WebOS, Windows Phone Mango, and also Samsung Bada. Yeah, I think that's all of them. Sorry, I'm trying to rush through this. PhoneGap you can develop in essentially whatever you want because they're built in HTML and JavaScript. So there's plugins to create PhoneGap-based projects in Xcode, which is the native framework or native tools IDE for building applications on iOS. You can build using Eclipse, which is obviously the Java-based IDE that you would use to build Android applications. You can also use Dreamweaver to create and edit your HTML, JavaScript, do live previews, but then you can also integrate Dreamweaver with both Xcode and the Android SDK, and you can launch the native emulator and simulator for Xcode, for iOS and for Android directly from Dreamweaver. And now let me show you really quickly a sample sample PhoneGap application, and this one is actually using the IAD.js framework. And so what I've got here is an application. Let me see if I can focus that, because it's really hard to see. And none of the text shows up for me. Okay. So this was actually developed in HTML and JavaScript. You can see that it looks pretty close to native. It interacts well. It's very responsive. I can go ahead and select an item and go ahead and go into details. This is all developed in HTML and JavaScript, and even the cover flow view that we have here, which you can see performs very well. This is all HTML, JavaScript, and CSS3 animation. And this is consuming real data from the Rotten Tomatoes API, which Rotten Tomatoes allows you to consume information about movies. So how much time is left? About 40 seconds. Okay, any questions? 40 seconds. Yeah. There are open source physics engines that you can use. There's Box2D. I know there's ActionScript implementations. That's for AIR. There's also JavaScript implementations of it. I would just look for some of the open source offerings. Yeah.
That game that was the iPad and week or whatever, you saw that it was for iPad 2 only. Does this work on iPad 1?
It is iPad 2 only, and the reason it's iPad 2 only is actually because it was originally a Flash game. And it was developed with essentially limitless resources in mind. They ported that code base to turn it into an iOS game, and because of that, it was designed in a way that's not necessarily optimal for iPad 1. The developers, there's a great write-up actually by the developers on Adobe somewhere. I don't remember the link for it, but they have disclosed that if they had started it from scratch, not targeting the web, but targeting mobile devices, it would be able to run on the iPad 1, but the way that they've structured it, it was not optimal on the iPad 1, so they didn't target that.
Yes, the AdobeAIR, is that a cross-compiler or
So AIR relies on LLVM, which is a low-level virtual machine. It's an open source, essentially, virtual machine platform. So the code that you're writing, so MXML and ActionScript, gets precompiled. That gets turned into bytecode that's capable of running in the LLVM virtual machine. And then, so exports out essentially the virtual machine instance with the optimized bytecode for that virtual machine. So
the LVM running onto the device.
yes. And there, one of the things when people say, oh, it's a virtual machine on a mobile device, that's, are there performance implications with it? And actually, the development of the technology has come a long way within the last year, to the point that using Flex 4.6 and the latest AIR 3 runtime, there's a lot of applications that are indistinguishable from native applications.
The Apple software developer agreement requires that you not use interpreters in your app. Have you had any trouble getting these approved through Apple?
That clause was actually taken out of the agreement a while back. So actually, all of these applications, they're real. They're in the App Store right now, and they are approved by Apple. Machinarium was actually not just the #1 game, but it was the game of the week, and it was promoted by Apple. So there are no issues as far as getting these into the iOS ecosystem.
I'm guessing they pulled that clause when they started using LVM as a compiler in general.
Possible. I don't know the specifics of that.
It was around like 4 or so.
Yeah, it was. I don't know the logic behind it, but I know that there was, everything from Corona to, AIR to PhoneGap to, some of the other competitors that are in the space. All of them would not be able to deliver cross-platform solutions to iOS.
Well, JavaScript was an exception. Most people are JavaScript based, but if it's a non-JavaScript interpreter, there's just a clause in there. It can't be a general purpose interpreter.
Well, not all of them. Some of them are JavaScript that do a cross-compilation step to native, and that gets compiled into, the actual binary, the APK or the IPA file. And if you're doing that, those were also restricted as well. But that clause is no longer an issue. So you can develop these and get into any ecosystem, any of the supported ecosystems. Okay.
So can you speak a little bit about how this one ended up deciding using a JavaScript framework in PhoneGap versus using Flex?
I'll give you the quick answer because I could go on a long time about this. The two things that I would say is the strengths of the development team, like if they are familiar with JavaScript or if they're familiar with ActionScript and Flex and the different paradigms. But also it depends on what you're trying to build and how big of an experience, what level of complexity, because at some point JavaScript becomes very difficult to manage for very large applications. Also, are you trying to do rich data visualization? Because while you can do that in JavaScript, that also gets extremely complex. We can talk offline, and I can go on ad nauseum about that. All right, thank you, everybody.